Hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of My Favorite Things, a series where I basically just talk about my favorite movies and games. Oddly enough, it's already midsummer, and with Shark Week coming up soon, I couldn't go without discussing what has always been one of my favorite films, the Steven Spielberg classic, Jaws. Jaws was the original summer blockbuster, being the most profitable film ever made as of 1975. So with so many monster movies and creature features, what makes Jaws so memorable? Let's see why Jaws is one of my favorite things. The movie Jaws is a loose adaptation of Peter Benchley's novel of the same name. The novel is a piece of fiction based off of a string of shark attacks along the Jersey Shore in the summer of 1916. The story of Jaws revolves around the small summer town of Amity Island. The town is preparing for its most profitable season when people come from all over to visit its beaches. Only, during this Independence Day, comes a shark scare after a young woman was killed while swimming one night. The story revolves around this small town that's desperate to have a successful Independence Day while dealing with its shark problem. Of course, we discover that this specific shark is a whopping 25-foot great white that has settled off the shore of Amity because of the food source that the beaches provide. Territoriality, as one of the leads, Matt Hooper, puts it. That's the basic premise of Jaws. But as the plot thickens, we see the town and its mayor struggling to justify keeping the beaches open. On one hand, it's of course a very serious and dangerous situation, but on the other hand, the town depends on this holiday season. If the beaches aren't open, then the town will go broke. If the writing was much less solid, then this could have came across as selfish, but we see how the town can reasonably justify opening the beaches. After the first incident, nothing was conclusive enough to make such a large decision. Mayor Larry Vaughn argued that the young woman could have been killed by a propeller in a boating accident. So until further analysis, no decisions are made. Then there's another shark attack, to which the beaches are closed for a day and a bounty is put out for a shark. After a tiger shark is caught and presumed to be the killer, the beaches are reopened. Again, it makes a lot of sense to assume that a tiger shark was the culprit, so it doesn't seem like such a boneheaded idea to open the beaches. Then on that 4th of July was the final straw, when another shark attack happened, even though there was a lot of security provided just in case. Afterwards comes the third act, when the main characters go on an extreme fishing trip. What keeps the story so interesting is that it isn't just about a shark that eats people, but the town's responses and how they keep trying to deal with the problem. Though it's barely seen, the shark also casts a large shadow over the whole first two acts. You always know there's a shark out there, but it's just a matter of when it will strike again. Something that fundamentally separates Jaws from so many other monster movies is how the characters are handled. In countless films, characters are just loosely thrown together for the sake of stalling in between large action spectacles, but they're never actually memorable or worth caring about. So when the action scenes do come, you don't even care. One of the core reasons why Jaws is such an amazing movie is how good the characters are. The main characters, in order of importance, are Chief Marcus Brody, marine biologist Matt Hooper, and the shark hunter Quint. Brody is the chief of police on Amity Island. He's very much an outsider to the town because he recently moved from New York. Back in the city during the 70s crime wave, he didn't feel like he was making much of a difference, so he feels very good about being the peacekeeper in Amity. Being the chief, the problems that the shark causes fall on him and Mayor Vaughn. Brody is worried to death about the threat that the shark provides, and spends the first two acts trying to close the beaches and protect the people. And when he doesn't, and a boy becomes lunch, he feels responsible. This was his chance to make a difference, but he doesn't, and an innocent child dies because of it. Chief Brody is also an outsider between the three starring characters. Hooper and Quint have a lot of experience being out on the water and have many stories to tell. Brody, on the other hand, has no idea what he's doing sometimes when they're out at sea, and has always been terrified of the ocean. A brilliant choice the writers made was to not explain why, but we do get a few clues. First, when his wife brings it up, Brody quickly replies that it's drowning he's afraid of, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Next, we see him reading about shark attacks. Then more towards the end, in the brilliant scene when Hooper and Quint are discussing scars they got, he looks at an unexplained scar on his torso. So we don't know exactly why Chief Brody's afraid of the water, and it's best left unsaid. I think Jaws is implying that he had a previous run-in with a shark, but I love that it's left up to interpretation. We already have one perfect scene about Quint's history with sharks. We don't need another about Brody's. Matt Hooper is another one of our main protagonists. He's a rich scientist called in to inspect the body of the shark's first victim and to analyze the situation in general. Hooper comes across as kind of awkward too. Also, being wealthy, he isn't into that fisherman culture like a lot of the citizens of Amity. Something great about this character is how we get to see his love of marine animals. He doesn't just know everything about them, but we see his deep fascination with sharks. In one scene, Hooper tells a story about how he first got into studying sharks. When he was a kid, he was given a boat, and as he was fishing, he hooked a baby thresher shark. The shark proceeded to eat his boat, and ever since then, he's been fascinated by sharks. There's also a funny scene of Hooper trying to make Brody stand on the edge of the boat so that he can get a good scale for his picture of the shark. And both of their personalities, Hooper loving animals and studying them, and Brody being terrified of the water, come into contact here, and it's really funny. Details like these really flesh out the characters and makes them feel real. Unlike Hooper, Quint is very much like your typical fisherman. He talks like one, acts tough, sings songs, and he displays a lot of his experience hunting sharks. At first, he's very cold and tough, especially towards Hooper, but over time, we get to know him better and warm up to him as he warms up to the other leads. Robert Shaw gives an unforgettably chilling performance as Quint. There are two amazing scenes in particular where he gives great monologues. One of them is our first look at him, when he offers to kill the shark for 10 grand after Alex was killed. It's such an attention-grabbing moment when he scratches his nails down the chalkboard. The other scene is probably the best scene in the whole movie. It's his bone-chilling, gut-wrenching, and brilliantly performed Indianapolis speech, when Quint talks about his experience on the Indianapolis, a US ship that was sunk by the Japanese towards the end of World War II. I feel like I can't do this scene justice, as it's one of the best scenes, period, so I'm gonna play a portion of it.
Very first light, Chief. Sharks come cruising. So we formed ourselves into tight groups. You know, it's kind of like old squares in a battle, like you see in a calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was, shark comes to the nearest man, that man he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you, right into your eyes. You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you. And those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and in spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in and they rip you to pieces.
Quint is one of the most memorable characters on screen, a lot of which is due to Robert Shaw's outstanding performance. Another person that I should talk about is Mayor Vaughn. Though technically he is an antagonist, I think he fits better here. He, like our other protagonists, are trying to do what's best for Amity Island. Like I mentioned before, throughout the first half of the movie, he does his best to justify keeping the beaches open. In tons of horrible movies, the antagonist is just some rich cheapskate who's trying to make more cash. But Jaws is different. Mayor Vaughn has the best of intentions. He wants to prevent Amity from going bankrupt while juggling the shark situation. When Hooper and Brody figure out that it wasn't the tiger shark, he allows them to use any resources possible to protect the people. Once the final attack happens, he's completely shocked. The mayor bet everything on that one day, and was so sure the beaches were safe, he let his own kids go. They could have died too, instead of the man who did get killed. So he's not a typical money grubber. You can see that he really does mean the best. The overarching reason why Jaws has such great characters is because they are what the film's about. Although the shark is awesome, it's not about that. It's about the people, so Jaws gives us a lot of time to get to know these characters and see them interact with each other. That's why they're so good. They feel so real. Great white sharks are probably the most feared creatures on the planet. Even though sharks have very few kills, when compared to a lot of other animals like hippos, lions, and mosquitoes. They have an awful reputation, and a lot of that is due to how effective the shark in Jaws is. The shark is the best monster movie antagonist. It's a 20-foot long, 3-ton great white shark, a true monster of a fish. The shark has established its territory as the waters off the coast of Amity Island, due to the food supply the beaches provide. The shark isn't really a character, it's more of a force of nature. It doesn't have a conscience, it doesn't care about the town's financial problems, it doesn't hate people, and it doesn't suffer from mental issues. It has no intentions other than to eat. Something that Jaws is constantly praised for is how much the shark was actually shown throughout the film, and I have to agree. I know this is because the actual robotic shark barely worked, so the filmmakers used it sparingly, but how they compensated for it was amazing, and was actually better than if they showed the shark itself. For the first half of Jaws, we don't see the shark. Instead, we get a fantastic first-person view from the shark's perspective. Coupled with John Williams' amazing score, these shots are really intense. Also, it would be hard to believe that the townspeople mistook a tiger shark for the killer, because we, the audience, would already have seen it to be the great white shark. It's better that we learn about the shark as the characters learn, instead of us knowing everything while they know nothing. It's annoying when movies do that. The best equivalent to the shark comes from Spielberg's other classic, Jurassic Park, with its velociraptors. We hear about their capabilities, we've seen examples of how dangerous they are, and only getting hints of them makes it all that more intense when our protagonists have to go face to face with them. The build-up is phenomenal. When we finally get to see the shark, it's so massive. Its sheer size alone is intimidating. But it's not too big. 25 feet is extremely unlikely for a great white, but it's not outside the realm of possibility, so the shark is somewhat believable. It's also amazing when the shark completely surpasses Quint's expectations. The most it's ever taken Quint to kill a shark was attaching 2 barrels to surface it. The shark in Jaws leaves the protagonists with their jaws dropped as it takes 3 barrels under, displaying just how powerful it is. The main characters become more and more aware of what exactly they're dealing with throughout the third act, which leads to one of the most misquoted lines in movie history.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
It's not, we're gonna need a bigger boat. It's you're gonna need a bigger boat. Jeez. But anyways, the shark and the way it was utilized are fantastic. Even though we may not think about it as we're clenching our seats, Jaws does have some pretty deep themes weaved into it. Perhaps the most prevalent is of economic and social class. On one side we have Quint, a rugged working class fisherman type, and on the other there's Hooper, a rich, college-educated scientist. Throughout a lot of the movie, Quint gives Hooper a hard time about his background and his use of fancy equipment and technology. For the beginning of the third act, the two are constantly getting at each other's throats. I think it's worth pointing out that both of them get along with Chief Brody just fine. He's more typical middle class, and no one ever dislikes the middle class, cause if you do, how are you getting votes? It takes a while, but Hooper and Quint finally begin to bond as they share stories about their different scars, and Hooper is stunned when he learns that Quint was on the Indianapolis. So they become closer as they learn more about each other. Another theme in Jaws is science. A lot of people in Jaws believe what they want to believe, instead of looking at the evidence available. Of course, Hooper is the most involved in this. After he's discovered that the bite of the caught tiger shark doesn't match the bite of the first victim, the fishermen and newspapers still go with the idea that they caught the correct shark. They are fake news. This happens again later with Mayor Vaughn. Even after cutting the shark open and seeing that it didn't eat Alex, and after finding a great white tooth on a destroyed boat, he still refuses to accept the fact that the wrong shark was caught. So people can be so desperate to believe what they want to, even if science doesn't back up their beliefs. No, bats aren't blind. No, daddy longlegs aren't spiders, and they aren't deadly either. No, velociraptors didn't look like this. No, the 5-second rule doesn't work. And no, peanut butter and jelly is not a good combination. There's good reason to consider Jaws as a cinematic masterpiece and one of the greatest films of all time. The cinematography is nothing short of brilliant. Like I mentioned before, the first-person shots are really intense. They let us know that the shark is coming without giving it away. Us not seeing the shark keeps us in the mindset of the characters and victims who can't see it either. And there are so many more great shots, like in the Indianapolis scene, when Brody's running to the pond, the reflection of the barrel, and of course, that final shot of the shark. There's also the famous use of the vertigo effect, developed by the master of thrillers, Hitchcock himself. Another cool thing about Jaws is its use of color. Have you ever noticed how there's barely any red? And if there is, then it's either on or around the victim. It's almost like Star Trek. Limiting the use of red makes the blood pop out extremely well. And, of course, no review is complete without talking about John Williams' brilliant score. It makes every scene it's in even better. All the slow and intense scenes are even that more thrilling. All the high energy scenes are that much more upbeat. And all the small moments are made that much more personal. Jaws without the soundtrack is like Batman without bat nipples. It's just not the same. The shark growls once or twice. Sharks don't do that. This may sound weird, but the ocean is the perfect setting for a serial killer thriller. Because there's a vast, never-ending ocean around you that you can't even see. A swimmer can only see above the waves, but they're completely vulnerable to anything below the surface. It's that fear of the unknown that gets to you. So Jaws has always been one of, if not my favorite movie. And I agree with many critics that consider Jaws as one of the greatest movies of all time. It works magnificently on every single level of filmmaking. The characters are extremely well fleshed out. The story is engaging. There are some good themes throughout. The cinematography is amazing. The soundtrack is historic, and it's so emotionally gripping. It all comes together to produce an unforgettably thrilling experience, and that is why Jaws is one of my favorite things.